Федеральным собранием 20.
I decided to conduct a special military operation.
And missiles rained down on Ukraine. A war which many thought could be averted turned into a reality. At the crack of dawn on the 24th of February, Ukrainians woke up to a nightmare. Russian troops came in from the north, east and south. Within days, Russian forces were marching towards the capital. With Russian forces all over, it seemed that Kyiv was about to fall. In the early days of March, Russia claimed control of the southern city of Kherson. Russian forces also seized the rest of the Kherson region. A large part of neighboring Zaporizhzhia region also fell. Europe's largest nuclear power plant slipped into Russian hands as well. By March 19th, Russian troops had seized about a quarter of Ukraine's territory. In days to come, Russian forces ran into unexpectedly stiff resistance. Ukrainian troops entrenched themselves and fought back, although not entirely with their own resources. From the early days of this war, the West has poured in billions of dollars worth of weapons into Ukraine. The US has repeatedly pledged to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. Russia, on its part, has blamed the West for fueling and prolonging the war with these supplies.
Те, кто планировали новую атаку на Донецк, на Донбасс, на Луганск, четко понимали, что следующая цель.
Back in Ukraine, Russia's special operation had a chilling effect on millions of Ukrainians. With alarms wailing almost every hour, there was fear and chaos everywhere. To escape the war, millions fled Ukraine, leaving behind their livelihoods. The borders of Poland and Romania were thronging with refugees. Hundreds of thousands of people made a beeline to find refuge in the neighboring countries. But the Russian army soon got stuck near Kyiv. Russian convoys near Kyiv became an easy target for Ukrainian artillery. A deadly onslaught followed. Russian forces suffered heavy losses. By the end of March, Moscow announced the withdrawal of its forces from Kyiv. Russia now shifted its focus towards the eastern industrial heartland of Donbass. But when Russian forces pulled back from Kyiv, they left behind a trail of death and destruction.
There is no way a war can be acceptable in the 21st century. Look at that.
Hundreds of civilian casualties and mass graves were revealed. The world is unnerved by the horrors of the Bucha killings, but the perpetrators are yet to be identified with any certainty. Meanwhile, the battle raged on for Mariupol. Russians wanted the key port city on the Sea of Azov at any cost. Moscow's airstrikes and artillery bombardment reduced much of the city to ruins. But Russian forces suffered huge losses as well. On April 13th, the missile cruiser Moskva was hit by Ukrainian missiles. The flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet sank the very next day. After 3 months of intense fighting, the last remaining Ukrainian stronghold in Mariupol surrendered. This was the Azovstal steel plant. With this, Mariupol fell into Russian hands. Ukraine was cut off from the Azov coast. Russia secured a land corridor to Crimea. More than 2 months into the war, Ukrainians secured their first significant victory. They regained the Snake Island. The tiny island in the Black Sea was one of the first to fall to Russia. The island acquired center stage when a Ukrainian soldier posted on the island swore at an attacking Russian warship. The altercation soon became one of the most popular signs of Ukrainian resistance. After months of intense strikes, Ukraine forced Russian troops to flee this island. The head of the Ukrainian presidential administration tweeted, "Kaboom." With the victory in Snake Island, an emboldened Ukraine went on the offensive. Early in August, powerful explosions struck an airbase in Crimea. Days later, more blasts hit a power substation and ammunition depots. Crimea was vulnerable, and Ukraine capitalized upon it. In the weeks that followed, Ukrainian forces launched an all-out surprise offensive in northeastern Kyiv. Russian forces holding positions for months in the region were caught by surprise. The result, a retreat for Russia, major territorial regains for Ukraine. Escalating the war, Russia ordered mobilization of 300,000 reservists. Many Russians evaded it, but Russia declared its mobilization effort a success. At the same time, Russia held referendums in captured territories. On September 30th, President Putin signed documents to formally annex Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia into Russia. Also during this time, one of the biggest casualties of the Ukraine war outside the battlefield was reported. The Nord Stream pipelines were mysteriously blown up. One of the biggest infrastructural projects in the region and one of the key routes to supply Russian fuel into Ukraine stood destroyed. Russia and the US blamed each other for the explosions and continued to do so. Days later, an important bridge linking Crimea to Russia was blown up. Putin blamed the attack on Ukraine. In response, Russia rained down missiles on all of Ukraine. In the days following the Crimea bridge attack, Russia launched massive missile strikes in major Ukrainian cities as far as Lviv. The target, Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. The barrage continued on a regular basis in the months that followed. Without power, millions of Ukrainians faced a bitter winter. Ukrainians mobilized resources to revive their power lines. But in winter, Ukraine was caught off guard. The missile attacks continued and calls for air defense systems grew. Ukraine soon adapted to the change in the course of the war. Early in December, Ukraine attacked 2 bases deep inside Russian territory. Another strike took place later in the month. Ukraine was ready to up the ante. Ukraine entered the new year with intense fighting still raging. After months of ferocious fighting, Russia captured the salt mining town of Soledar in mid-January. Moscow also pressed its offensive to seize the Ukrainian stronghold of Bakhmut. Russia was inching closer by the day. Ukrainians feared a Russian recapture of the eastern stronghold. It is still uncertain in which direction the war may go, but looking back at this 1 year, one is reminded of the words of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Staring intently into the camera, in his last-ditch video-recorded plea against the invasion, Zelensky had said,
"The war is a big disaster, and this disaster has a high price, with every meaning of this word. People lose money, reputation, quality of life, they lose freedom. But the main thing is that people lose their loved ones, they lose themselves.
Every hour of every day since has proven those words to be right. No matter who wins from here on, the consequences of this war will not be limited to Ukraine and Ukrainians. And the bigger question is, whose war is it anyway?
WION now available in your country. Download the app and get all the news on the move.